All right, so our quiz is tomorrow on just section 4.4. The first three questions say what quadrant does theta lie in? So we have to know what's our acronym for this. All students take calculus. So we start in the first quadrant. All students take calculus. So here, all students take calculus. In case we don't remember, these letters stand for what's positive in that quadrant. So in the first quadrant, all of our trig functions are positive. The second one, sine and its reciprocal are positive. Third quadrant, tangent and its reciprocal are positive. And then the last one, cosine and its reciprocal are positive. So number one says cosine of theta is less than 0. Does that mean it's positive or negative? Negative if it's less than 0. So what quadrant can we cancel out? Well, cosine's not positive, so we can cancel out the cosine one. And it's not going to be in the all positive one. So we can cancel out those two. The next hint says cosecant is greater than 0, so that means it's positive. And cosecant is the reciprocal of which trig function? Sine. So sine is positive. Is sine positive in the tangent quadrant? Nope. Only tangent is positive in the tangent quadrant, so it has to be in the sine quadrant. So what quadrant is that? 2. So you could say 2 or 2. Either way. So let's look at number 2. So again, we start with all students take calculus. So it says cotangent is greater than 0, so that means it is positive. In which quadrants is cotangent positive? 1 and 3. It's positive in the all positive one, and it's positive in the tangent one, because cotangent goes with tangent. So we can cross out the second and fourth one, because it won't be in those two. And then our next hint says secant is greater than 0. So this means that it's positive. Secant goes with which trig function? Cosine. Is cosine positive in the tangent quadrant or in the all quadrant? The all one. So we can cross out tangent, and we're just left with A, which is which quadrant? The first one. So you could say 1 or 1, either way. Let's look at the third one. All students take calculus. So sine is less than 0, so that means that it is negative. In which two quadrants is sine negative? That's where it's positive, but we're looking for where is sine negative. Either the tangent one or the cosine one. So I can cross out the first two, because it's negative, so it's not going to be in the sine positive or in the all positive one. Next, we have secant. Secant is greater than 0, so that means it's positive. And secant goes with which trig function? Cosine. So where is cosine positive? In the cosine quadrant, so we can cross out tangent. And which quadrant is that? Quadrant 4. 4, 4. For 4, we have to find all 6 trig functions, exact answers only. So it gave us that sine of theta is negative 4 over 9, and tangent is less than 0. So tangent is negative. So for these, we need to know our SOHCAHTOA. Sine is what over what? Opposite over hypotenuse. Or in terms of x, y, and r, it would be what? Y over r. Either way would work for these. It just kind of depends on how you look at it. So if you look at it as a triangle, opposite over hypotenuse would be fine. If you look at it as a theta on our plane, kind of helps to know that it's y over r. Does the negative go with the opposite or the hypotenuse? Why the opposite? Hypotenuse and the radius are always positive. So the hypotenuse and the radius are always positive. So I'm going to draw it as a triangle here with my theta. My hypotenuse is 9. Opposite is -4, we could say. So how would I find my adjacent? Do Pythagorean theorem. So -4 squared plus, we can say a squared is equal to 9 squared. 16 plus a squared is equal to 81. Subtract 16. So a squared is 65. Take the square root. Can I simplify the square root of 65? Let's see, what are 2 factors of 65? 5 and 13. Do I have any pairs? No, so it's just the square root of 65. Now it could be positive or negative depending on which quadrant it's in. We could either save that for last, or you could find out which quadrant it's in now. So we have all students take calculus. If sine is negative, because sine was -4/9, which 2 quadrants can I eliminate? Sine and all. It's not going to be in the first or second because sine is negative. Tangent is also negative. So what other quadrant can I cancel out? Tangent. So my angle is going to be down here, my theta. My point is here. This is like my XY point. Would my X be positive or negative? Positive, because we go to the right. We go in the positive direction. So square root 65 is going to be positive. And then my y, we already said was -4. And our hypotenuse is 9. Or the r is 9. So let's find our remaining trig functions. We already know what sine is. Cosine of theta would be what? So again, SOHCAHTOA. Perfect. Adjacent over hypotenuse. So we could either use this triangle or this one. Just depends on how you want to look at it. Adjacent would be square root 65 over our hypotenuse, which is 9. Tangent would be what? Opposite over adjacent. So -4 over square root 65. I would have to rationalize this, so multiply the top and the bottom by square root 65. So -4 square root 65 over 65. You can rationalize it in your head, that's fine. So next we want to find cosecant, which we can just flip sign. So instead of being -4 over 9, it would be -9 over 4. Next, secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So that would be 9 over square root 65. So 9 square root 65 over 65. And then cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent. So square root 65 over -4. You can always double check your signs at the end. We know that we're in the 4th quadrant. So cosine and its reciprocal are the only ones that are going to be positive. So everything else will be negative. So cosine and its reciprocal are positive. Everything else is negative. So you can always double check your signs at the end. Yes. All right. So for number 5, it gave us cotangent is 10 over 3. So knowing my SOHCAHTOA, cotangent would be what over what? Adjacent over opposite. So I know my adjacent and the opposite. Let's figure out what quadrant we're in, just so we know that, because if these were both negative, we wouldn't really be able to tell right here because the negatives would make it a positive. So let's just double check which quadrant we're supposed to be in. So I have all students take calculus. Cotangent is positive. Cotangent goes with tangent. So which 2 quadrants can I cancel out? The second and fourth. Because cotangent is positive, it's either going to be in the all positive or in the tangent positive one. Sine is less than 0, so that means sine is positive or negative? Negative. So which other quadrant can I cancel out? All. If sine's negative, it's not going to be in the all positive one. So we're looking at the 3rd quadrant. So I can draw my triangle here. So cotangent is adjacent over opposite. So my adjacent would be 10. My opposite is 3. Is this a positive 10 or a negative 10? How do you know it's negative? Because it's going to the left. We're in the left direction, so it's negative. Is it a positive 3 or negative 3? Negative, because it's going down. We always have to check our signs. So it should be negative 10 and negative 3 as our opposite and adjacents. And then how can I find my hypotenuse? Pythagorean theorem. So negative 10 squared plus negative 3 squared is equal to, we can call it h squared. So 100 plus 9 is equal to h squared. So my hypotenuse is the square root of 109. Can I simplify the square root of 109? Do we have any factors of 109? Nope. So we just leave it like that. So now let's find our remaining trig functions. So what would sine of theta be? Opposite over hypotenuse. So negative 3 over square root 109. We have to rationalize, so negative 3 times square root 109 over 109. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, so negative 10 over square root 109. So negative 10 square root 109 over 109. Tangent would be opposite over adjacent. So negative 3 over negative 10, which would just be 3 over 10. And then we need our reciprocal functions. So cosecant would be next. We just flip sign, so that would be square root 109 over negative 3. Secant would be square root 109 over negative 10. And then cotangent was given to us. All right, number 6. We've defined the reference angle for the following. So depending on which quadrant we're in, depends on which formula we use for our reference angles. So if we're in the first quadrant, whatever our theta is, that is our theta prime, our reference angle. If we're in the second quadrant, we use 180 minus theta. If we're in the third quadrant, we use theta minus 180. And the fourth quadrant is 360 minus theta. So our reference angle, our theta prime, is always going to be acute and positive. So for number 6, what quadrant does 123 fall into? The second quadrant. So I would use this formula here, 180 minus 123. We get 57. Yes, so 57 degrees is my reference angle. All right, for number 7, I have 265. What quadrant does that fall into? The third. So the third, I do 265, my theta minus 180. What do we get? What? 85 degrees. Don't forget your degree symbol. For number 8, we have pi over 6. I don't know where pi over 6 is. So what can I do to figure out what quadrant pi over 6 is in? Multiply it by 180 over pi. So the pi's cancel. 6 goes into 180 30 times. So 30 degrees. What quadrant is 30 degrees in? The first. So what would my reference angle be? If the question gives you radians, your answer has to be in radians. So what would my reference angle be? Pi over 6. So if the question gives you radians, you have to answer in radians. So if we convert it to degrees to help us, just make sure you convert it back. For number 9, how do I know where negative 7 pi over 3 is? I have to change it to degrees, so I multiply it by 180 over pi. Pi's cancel, 3 goes into 180 60 times. So I have negative 7 times 60, which would be negative 420. What should I do next to figure out what quadrant this is in? Awesome. If you have a negative angle, we always want to add 360 to find the positive coterminal angle, because that ends at the same spot. So that would just tell us the positive position of it. So we add 360. So we get 80. 60. Negative 60. It's still negative, so I'm going to add 360 again. So it gives me 300. What quadrant is 300 degrees in? The fourth. So I would do 360 minus 300, which gives me 60 degrees. So my reference angle is 60 degrees, but this question gave me radians. So what would I need to do? Convert it back. So multiply it by pi over 180. So 60 goes into 180 3 times, so it'd be pi over 3. All right. So for 11, we have to use reference angles to evaluate all 6 trig functions. So we have to find our reference angle. That's step 1. Step 2 would be to use a special right triangle. So our special right triangles are either 30, 60, 90 or 45, 45, 90. So in a 30, 60, 90, what is opposite of the 30? X, you could call it X or A. What is opposite of the 60? X square root 3. What's opposite of the 90? 2x. in a 45, 45, 90. What's opposite of the 45? X and X. And what's the hypotenuse? X square root 2. Awesome. These you have to have memorized. You need to know these. So our reference angles for these types of questions, any question that says use reference angles to evaluate all 6 trig functions, your reference angle will either be 30, 60, or 45, or the radians of that, or it could also fall on one of your axes here. So we have the x-axis and y-axis, just like how we had on the unit circle. So we got to think back to the unit circle. It could be either one of these 4 points. So remember, this is 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and 270. And this is also 360. What coordinate point would this be? 1, 0. Because we go to the right one and we stay on 0. What coordinate point would this be? 0, 1, because we stay on 0, go up 1. What about at 180? -1, 0, because we go to the left to -1, stay at 0. And then at 270, 0, -1. So these 4 points you have to have memorized. And then if it asks for the trig functions, sine, we look at what coordinate, x, y, or r. We look at the y. Cosine, we look at the x. And tangent, y over x. So if I asked you for the sine of 90, what would that be? 1. Because the y coordinate would be 1. So this you have to know, because it's either going to be one of your special right triangles, or it'll be on one of the axes here. So it'll either be 0, 90, 180, 270, something like that. You gotta know this. So let's look at 11. How can I find the reference angle to 9 pi over 4? Awesome. I want to convert it to figure out what quadrant it's in. So I'm going to multiply by 180 over pi. Pi's cancel. 4 goes into 180. How many times? 45. So then I have 45 times 9. 405. So this would be 405 degrees. That is more than one trip around the unit circle. So how could I figure out where this is? Subtract 360 to find a coterminal angle. So the same ending. So it's pretty much the same thing. So we get 45. So 45 ends in what quadrant? The first one. So what would my reference angle be? My reference angle is also 45 because it's the same thing. So I have a 45, 45, 90. So I use x, x, and what's my hypotenuse here? X square root 2. So this is all we need to find our 6 trig functions. The x's will cancel, so they're not going to be in your answer. They'll always cancel. So sine of 9 pi over 4 would be what? Perfect. X over x square root 2. The x's cancel, and then I have to rationalize, so it ends up being square root 2 over 2. Cosine of 9 pi over 4 is what? Same thing, square root 2 over 2. Tangent of 9 pi over 4, it would be x over x, which is just 1. Then we have our reciprocal functions. So cosecant of 9 pi over 4 would be square root 2, just square root 2. What is the secant of 9 pi over 4? Just square root 2. And then what is cotangent of 9 pi over 4? One. The reciprocal of 1, which is just 1. The last thing we always have to do is check the signs. If I'm in the first quadrant, what does that tell me about the signs? They're all positive. So all of my signs here are positive. So I don't have to change any to negative. But if you were in any other quadrant, you would just have to make sure you include your negative signs. So always, the last thing you want to do is check your signs. So number 12, I'm going to make it a positive 300. I'm just changing the question because negative 300 ends up in the first quadrant again, so everything would be positive, but I want to make it positive 300. So we have positive 300 degrees. How can I find my reference angle? (360 minus 300). If we were confused and accidentally put 300 minus 360, we'd get a negative, and we know that our reference angles can never be negative. They're always going to be positive. So we get 60 degrees. So we can either just make a triangle or actually put it on our coordinate plane here. 300 would be in which quadrant? The fourth quadrant. And then we said our reference angle here is 60 degrees. So that makes our other angle 30 degrees. So we have a 30, 60, 90 triangle. So what is opposite of the 60? Just x. X square root 3. Opposite of the 30 would be x, and then our hypotenuse, 2x. So now to find our trig functions. Sine of theta would be what? So it would be x square root 3 over 2x. The x's cancel, so square root 3 over 2. I'm going to save the signs for last and do that last. Next, we have cosine. So cosine is the adjacent over hypotenuse. So x over 2x, which simplifies to 1/2. Then tangent would be opposite over adjacent, so x square root 3 over x, which would just be square root 3. Next, we have the reciprocals, so cosecant. So we flip it. This would be 2 over square root 3. Can I leave my answer like this? Nope. Have to rationalize. So 2 square root 3 over 3. Secant of theta would be 2. And cotangent of theta is 1 over square root 3. We have to rationalize, so it would be square root 3 over 3. Last thing we have to do is what? Check the signs. So I have all students take calculus. What is positive in the fourth quadrant? Cosine and secant. So these are the only two positive ones, so I have to make everything else negative. So negative square root 3 over 2, negative 2 square root 3 over 3. Cosine and secant stay positive, so then negative square root 3 and negative square root 3 over 3. So always check your signs at the end, or you could do it during. It is fine.